Hi everyone, thanks so much for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. Before we bring on tonight's guest, if you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you've had a Sasquatch sighting and would like to be a guest on Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio, please go to bigfooteyewitness.com and submit a report. All right, let's bring on tonight's guest. Since the first episode of Dogman Encounters aired on August 22nd of 2015, I've had several special guests come on and share encounters that they've collected from eyewitnesses. Normally, I've tried to shy away from that, but there have been a few, like tonight's guest, who, well, let's just say he has a special way of sharing encounters, and because of that, it's always been a great thing when he's come on the show. Of course, I'm talking about Marvin Allen. Marvin, thanks so much for coming back on.
Thanks for having me back, Vic.
Oh, thanks so much for coming back. We appreciate your time. Marvin, you recently had me on your show as a guest on 2 separate occasions. For anyone who wants to check out those shows or any of the other shows you've done, how can they do that?
Well, I've been doing this cryptid thing for the past couple of years. You can find me in Marvin Allen, True Encounters, and I recently just started a Facebook page, where I do lives, and that is called True Encounters with Marvin Allen and the Doug Pack. And the good thing about that is we don't just talk about Dogman, we cover other cryptids such as, Bigfoot, the Rake, Jersey Devil, Paranormal, Black Eye Kids. So basically we're going to cover the whole round table because we're trying to do something different because we know everybody not just saying Dogman or Bigfoot. So anybody, if you had, paranormal, just come over, subscribe, and check out the channel.
If you haven't checked out his channel yet, what are you waiting for? It really is a good channel, and I hope you do that. Marvin, I don't want to keep you from doing what you do best any longer, so here's where I get out of the way and toss you the mic. Please give the listeners what they've been waiting for now.
Okay, as y'all all know, my name is Marvin Allen. What I do is I collect encounters. So I ain't going to keep y'all waiting. We're going to jump right into this first encounter. Now, this first encounter right here, it happened in Jacobsburg State Park, which is in Pennsylvania. And, anonymity is something that I'm really strict on. So the name that I'm going to use for this is Kevin. So Kevin said he'd been to a lot of parks up in Pennsylvania, but this certain park, Jacobsburg, he never been to this. So he decided to go there because he wanted to do a little fishing and see what he could catch. So Kevin said he come to this spot. It's a stream. Now, mind you, the stream on the width side, he said it had to be at least 20 yards from the side he on, and you go on the other side. So he said he found this nice spot. He set his stuff up. There was a tree right there beside him. So he put his box down there. He had his cool and everything. So he do what he loved to do. He started to fish. So he threw his line in, sitting there, and he fishing. He said when he got there, he heard everything, birds chirping. He heard insects and everything. So he fishing. So he said after about 5 minutes, he catch his first fish. He caught his first trout. So he reels it in, takes it off, puts it in the bucket, put another bait on. He throws it out again. Now, he said after having his line in the water for around 15 minutes, he said that's when stuff started to take a turn. He said that's when the noise it stopped. He said, but at first he didn't pay it no attention. He just kept on fishing. So he's still trying to fish, seeing if he can catch anything. He said, so after a few more seconds is when he hears something on the other side of that stream. And when he looks over there where the noise coming from, he don't see anything. So he plays it off. He said, maybe I'm, losing it. So he's still trying to fish. He said that's when it's like the wind started to pick up. He said it was like a little breeze that came. He said that when that breeze came, he got the most awfulest smell that he never smelled in his life. And he was like, what is that? And he thinking that it's something dead around there. So he looking, he walks down on the side of the stream where he at to look, to make sure it ain't no dead animals or nothing like that. But he don't see nothing. But he still smells this horrible smell. So he looks and glances on the other side. Now, mind you, it's still dead quiet. You can't hear nothing. So he stands still and he looked. He looked to the left and the right on the other side of the stream. He said after about a minute, he heard a noise again. But this time it's like a stick break. He said he looks about 30 yards down and he can see this dark figure. He don't know what it is, but he can see this dark figure just behind this tree. So he focuses in on it and he looking. He said that's when he see a snout and he see one ear sticking up. He can see this thing right side of his body. Now he know it ain't a bear, it ain't a coyote, it ain't a wolf, it ain't none of those things. Because what he said to me is that this thing was standing up bipedal. So he curious now. He walks about 20 feet and still glances on the other side. And when he do that, that's when this creature made its presence. He said that's when this thing stepped out from behind the tree. He said, and when he saw that thing, he almost, put it this way, had a shaman moment. He said, what the is that? He said, when he said that, that's when this creature started walking on the opposite side in his direction. He said this thing took about 10 steps, big strides though, and it stopped. Now this thing in full view. It's no bushes blocking it. It's no trees blocking it. It's nothing blocking it. He see this thing. He say the thing, it was massive. He said it had to be 7 to 7.5 feet tall. Jet black. He said, but it looked like this thing had gray or silver, like on the tips of its hair. He said, because he could see it. That's how he knew it had another color in it. He said, these thing eyes, he said he don't know if they illuminated, but he said he could clearly see that these things' eyes was bright. He said they looked like the size of golf balls. Now that's big for some eyes. He said this thing had a long snout, long arms that hung down past this thing's knees with hands and claws. But it had canine legs. So he said, what the is this? Now he said he never heard of no Dogman. Said he heard of Bigfoot. He said, but he never heard of nothing that was called a Dogman. He's still watching this creature. And this thing is still watching him. He said that's when this creature made a low, guttering growl. He said, and when that thing did that, he said it's like it shook him. He said he could feel it. He could say he could feel the vibration from this low growl. He said that's when he started to walk backwards to that tree where he had his stuff at. So he gets to that tree. Now, mind you, this thing is still watching him. He said whether it's curious or not, He didn't care. He just wanted to get out of there alive. So he gets to the tree. He grabs his fishing pole and he grabs his little cooler. He picks it up. He said once he did that, that's when this thing took a few steps to the water. He said you could see this thing standing in the water and it stopped. Kevin said he froze. He confused now because he don't want to make a move that make this thing come over on the other side and do something to him because he don't know what he's dealing with. But the one thing he said when he talked to me, he said that this thing had some type of intelligence. He said, so he started to walk northbound on the side that he was on. He said he would take some steps and that creature would continue to walk across that stream. He would stop. Now he's scared. He don't have a weapon on him. He don't have no way to protect himself. This man is shook now because he don't know what this thing is going to do to him if he come on the other side. He said he put his cooler down in his reel. And this would mess my head up when he told me this. He said he sat on his cooler. He said he sat on his cooler and didn't move. He said he didn't look at this creature no more. He said he held his head down and looked at the ground because he knew that this was a predator and he didn't want this thing to feel threatened. So he continued to look down at the ground. And by him looking down at the ground, he can hear this thing walking in the water, coming in his direction. Splash, 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 splash. He can hear it loud and clear. He said once he heard the splash and stop, he knew this creature made it on the other side where he was at. He said he continued not to look at this creature. That's when he heard the steps come in his direction. Boom, 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 boom. He said he looks out the corner of his eye, his peripheral vision, and said this thing couldn't have been no more than 10 feet away from him. And that creature stopped. He said when that creature stopped, he could hear this thing start to sniff the air. He said this thing was loud. And he said, you know the sounds that like a horse would make? He said it just, what it did, the sounds just was loud and it was like that. You know, and I tried to ask him, what do you mean? He said, I can't really explain it, but the sound that he was making, even though he was sniffing the air, was just loud like that. He said he continued to watch this thing out the corner of his eye. And after this thing got finished sniffing the air, he said he started to cry. He said because the only thing that he could think about at this time was his wife and his kids. That if he died that day, who wouldn't take care of them? He said so he continued to look at the ground and continue to cry. He said that's when he heard this creature starts to walk again. He said, but when he heard this creature started to walk, it turned and went in the opposite direction. He said he still didn't hold his head up and watch. He said he just listened as the footsteps got further and further and further away from him. That's when he heard the water splashing again. Splash, 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 splash. Going back on the other side of that stream. He said he waited for about an hour and a half. He couldn't move. He was stuck. Said that's when he got up and he left. He said he will never, ever go back to that park again. And I asked him, I said, did you tell your family? He said, I told my wife. I didn't tell her what I saw, but I told her that I almost didn't make it home. And she said, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? He said, I don't want to talk about it no more. I'm just happy to be home. I love you. And he looked at his kids and he said, I love y'all too. I know what these things can do to you, the fear that they put in a person. He just said he's scared to even go fishing. And that's something that he loved to do. I asked him, did this thing have a tail? He said, no, he didn't see a tail. He said, but this, just the way this thing was built, he said, this thing is built to kill just by looking at it and seeing it. And I was telling him, I say, these cryptids, they call them Dogman. I said, if you look at the proportion of his body, you can see the name. He said he never heard of them. I said, man, it's been so many encounters in Pennsylvania. I have did so many encounters in Pennsylvania about these creatures. And I told him, anytime you need to talk, if you ever hear of anybody else that have encountered, you got my number. I'm here to help. And I'm going to do everything I can to find out what these creatures really are, because it's more to it. This next encounter, my eyewitness that told me about it said that it happened 3 miles away from Skinwalker Ranch. Now, her name, Nikki, and I was just fortunate enough to talk to her husband who had this encounter, and he's fortunate enough to talk to me and tell me in his words about what really happened. Now, her husband, Jason, said that they would go hunting. And he said that this spot that they chose was near this old dry lake bed. Like at one time it was water there, but you know, it had dried up. So he said they went out there just to go hunting. And he said they was out there for a few hours. Now, mind you, this day that when they was out there, it started to rain. He said not heavy, but it was like a drizzle rain. He said it started to rain. He said, and as it started to rain, you know, they standing out there and they looking, you know, trying to see what they could see. He said that's when they could smell something that smelled like wet dog. And they look and they like, they didn't see no animals or nothing like that. Only thing that they could do was look at each other and really be puzzled because they could smell it. But they looking around to see if they see any kind of other animals out there, which they didn't. So he said after about 30 more minutes is when they caught a glance of something. They didn't know what it was at this time, but they caught a glance of something. And he said it ran behind these thickets and it didn't come out. It just stayed back there. And he looked at his friend. He was like, what was that? He said, man, I don't know. He said, we've been out here too long. It's dark now. And I think we need to head back and go head on home. So they gets in their truck. He said during this time he had a F-150. He said so he gets in his truck and they head back. He said that the way they was riding back, it had a fence on one side and a fence on the other. Now, mind you, he said this fence was 5 to 6 feet tall on both sides. And it's a dirt road that they riding down. Now it's dark. They riding and they talking. He's still puzzled about what they saw early, the glimpse, but they didn't know what it was. And then the smell. He said, so they driving down this dirt road. He said about 25 to 30 yards in front of him, he sees something leap from the left over this fence and it lands in the middle of this dirt road. And the lights is on it. And he looked and he was like, what is it? He said this thing was on all fours, but it was huge just to be on all fours. He said that's when this thing started to walk towards their truck. And when it walks towards their truck, it's coming into view. He said as it's walking though, it's going from side to side, like it's going in and out, in and out, but it's coming in their direction. He said this thing gets about 5 feet from the hood of his truck. He said he knew this thing had to be big because this thing back was over top of the hood of his truck and it's on all fours. He said that's when this thing looks in the front window. It looks clearly at them, but they still don't know what this thing is at this time. He said that's when this thing walked around to the driver's side door. Now, mind you, he said this thing is on all fours, but it's up there to where his window at, and it looks dead at him. He said that's when he see that this thing had spots, and he looks in the face of this thing. And these are his words. He said this thing looked exactly like a hyena. He said all the features in the face, the ears, look just like a hyena, along with the spots. He said that's when this thing started to sniff around the door of his truck. After he sniffed, he started to turn back around in the direction that he came. And it starts to walk back down. They watching this thing walk away from them. He said that's when he noticed that this thing had a tail. Now this would really mess my head up when he told me this part. He said the tail on this thing, what he seen, was small. He said it looked like a lynx tail. Wasn't long. He said it looked like a tail that would be on like a lynx. And it had it tucked like up under its butt. He said just like that. And they watching this thing walk away. It started to walk and it stopped. It turns and it looks at them again. And it stared for about 15 more seconds. And then it turned and continued. They said it looked like this thing waited till it got in the exact same spot that it leaped over. They said this thing took one leap, jumped over the fence and over the thickets. And he said that he don't know no animal that could leap like that to clear a fence in the clear, the thicket bushes. So they sat there until they knew that this thing was gone. Started to drive off slow in the direction of where that thing jumped. As they ride, his friends say, look. And they looked out. They said they could see it clear as day. They see prints. They gets out the car. They go look. This where the story just take a whole twist. This where the story get real strange. They said when they gets out and looks at the print, they said it was 4 perfectly good prints because of the rain. He said when they looked at these prints, they didn't look canine. They didn't look 3-toed, 4-toed, 5-toed, whatever you want to call it. He said they didn't look like no type of canine prints. Now listen when I say this, because these is his words. He said that the prints looked like a thumb. If you was to take your thumb and stick it down in the dirt, 4 of them, perfectly. He said that these things looked just like a thumbprint. And I asked him, I said, what do you mean a thumbprint? No claws, no nothing. He said, look, I'm only telling you what I saw and what they looked like to me. He said they looked just like a thumbprint. He said I didn't have my phone on me. I didn't have a camera because I would have took pictures. Because I know when I say this, people wasn't going to believe me. He said, but I don't have no reason to lie. I'm not gaining nothing up for this or around this. He said they looked like thumbprints. And I told him, I said, man, if that's what you saw, then that's what you saw. He said he couldn't explain it. He said, just like this thing had a tail like a lynx cat. He said, but all the features on this thing was canine. The head, the ears. He said, this thing looked just like a hyena. He said it still puzzled him to this day about those prints because he can't really explain what they are. He said all he knows is that they look just like a thumbprint. He said, so he left. They got back to the house and he told his wife what they saw. And she said, well, you think it was one of these animals that be around here? He said, no. He said Skinwalker Ranch got a history of paranormal and all types of creatures. He said it could have been one of those. I don't know. So I was just happy enough to get this encounter, happy enough to talk to him because, like I said, this took a twist just by the prints. That's what really messed my head up. But that was his encounter that happened near Skinwalker Ranch. Now, this next encounter came not far from the reservation and the town that the people stayed in. So 2 officers said that they was riding around doing their rounds, and the dispatcher back at the station started getting calls flooding in, and people was calling in and they was panicking, talking about, look, this thing is running around here. It's coming from down off top of the ridge and coming down, and it's running here, running there. And they was like, well, what are you talking about? And the lady said, one of those wolf things. So the whole time the radio is on and they dispatch, and now what they doing is they send a dispatch out. And this was all caught on recorded. They sent a dispatch out. They said, we're going to need everyone to go in your house, lock your door, stay in, do not come out. Now, My eyewitness who have gave me a lot of encounters too said they listening to the whole thing as it's coming past the dispatch. Now, this officer say they get to this spot where they spot this dark figure. And they spot this dark figure coming down off of a ridge. And in the direction that it's going in, it's running in the direction of this town. So they following it. They trying to catch up on it. Now, mind you, he said when they crossed it, that ridge and came down and headed towards town, one of the officers said that's when they, on the outside of the window on the passenger side, they started to shoot at this creature. Now, mind you, he says he shoots 5 times. He know he struck this thing 3. He said because he could see the right side jerk as it's running, the left side jerk as it's running. Now this thing is running and it's running up bipedal. It's coming off on the radio. They dispatching everything. They said it's a tall, dark figure, looks like a werewolf. It's running bipedal and it's heading towards. So they say when this thing hits the community, they said this thing leaped. On the first house it's seen, it leaped up on the roof. They gets in the community, the police. They riding down. They watching this dog creature jump from house to house. I mean, they said this thing leaping. I mean, and they said it's leaping nice distance. And they watching this thing. Officer sitting in the car, he said, that might be one of those, skinwalker things. And they said, as this thing is running, it's looking at them at the same time. It's watching them. It's looking at them at the same time as it's leaping from house to house to house. And they said this thing, the officer that was in the passenger side said this thing had a look on its face like a grin, like it was taunting them. Like it was like, yeah, you ain't gonna catch me. You can't kill me. He said that's what was going through his mind, what he was thinking. This thing study jumping from roof to roof to roof. It gets to the last house and it leaps out onto the road. Now, mind you, at this time, it's in front of the police car. It's running. They said this thing is balling and they speeding behind it too. That's when the officer starts to fire again. He lets off 5 more shots, striking this creature at least 2 times. They said after this creature got to the end of this community, it broke off to its left, ran down into this gully, went back up to where the top of this ridge was and cleared it. And they said this thing moved so fast, it cleared that whole area in a matter of seconds. They said that's how fast it was. Now, when I got to talk to him, because like I said, my eyewitness from out there, she know a lot of people out there even on the reservation, and he was a good friend of hers. He said that he have encountered these creatures on numerous occasions. One night he driving. He says he pulls over a car for speeding. He's on the bullhorn and he tell him, step out your vehicle. Nobody steps out. So he says he shines his light. And when he shines his light, he can see that it's 2 occupants in the back seat of this 4-door. He could see that it's 2 occupants, but they not moving. He on his bullhorn again. Step out from your vehicle. Still, no answer. He said that's when he started to walk towards the car. Now this right here is going to mess your head up because it messed mine up. And it still got me puzzled to this day since he told me. He said he gets to the driver side back door and he looks in the window. He said, but for some reason, he couldn't see nothing at first, but he knew it was 2 occupants in the back seat. He said, that's when the window started to come down. And as it was coming down, he stepped backwards away from the window, drawing his pistol. And like I said, it's going to mess your head up. He said, as that window started to come down, he said, that's when this face came into view. He said, this thing looked and it turned towards him in his direction. He said, when he looked at this thing, he dropped his light. He said, this thing looked just like a mastiff. These his words. He said, this thing looked just like a mastiff in the face. That's when another window come down in the front. And this thing looked at him too. And this thing looked just like a mastiff. He said he kindly put his gun down to his side, like he wasn't no threat. Walked back to his car, got in, and he said he just sat there. And that car just pulled off. He said, because now, what he gonna tell his superiors? They know he had a call for a suspicious car in Speedway. He said, what am I gonna tell my superiors? That I seen Doug's driving a car? He said this messed his head up for a long, long time. He said he kept this in for years. He said he had to make up something to tell his superiors about that car that night. He said because he never, ever seen nothing like that. And that was crazy. And when I'm on the phone talking to him, and I asked him, I said, did you see the lower body? Did they get out the car at any time? And he was telling me, he said, no. They just rolled down the window and looked at me. And they had the heads of a mass. He said they was just huge, taking up the whole window. That's just crazy, man. Some of the stuff that go on out here. It's crazy, it just boggles the mind. And that was this encounter, Vic, and that happened out at Skinwalker Ranch too. Now, this next encounter comes out of Mississippi. Now, my eyewitness said that he had his own business, and after him and 2 of his co-workers had finished up, he said he would always take them home and drop them off because they lived in the same house. He said, so they packed up and they started to leave. And they said they always take these same routes when he got to drop them off to go home. So he said just this particular night, something took him in another direction. That means it would take him longer to get them home. He said, so they drive. They gets on this small dirt road. He said they had to drive down. When you get to the end, you had to make another left and go down another small road. And they had to take this road down before they can get back on the main road. But they didn't make it to this main road. He said they going down, when they made that left, they going down this road. Now, mind you, he said on each side is nothing but woods down this small dirt road, but it's nothing but woods. And he said on the right-hand side it's like an opening. It's like a gate. He said maybe somebody might live back there, something like that, but it's an opening. He said he see this opening that he's coming up on. Now, mind you, it's a person on the passenger side and it's one sitting in the back behind him. He said this opening on the right-hand side, something made him slow down and look over in that direction. He said he don't know what. He said, but something did. So he asked his friend, he said, crack your window. Cracked his window and he cracked his. The guy in the back seat that said, what y'all doing? He said, no, man. He said, just be quiet, listen. He said, as he's slowing down, he said, because he wasn't going fast, because mind you, this ain't a big road. But he said he slowed down. He get past the opening on the right-hand side and he continued to drive. He said after about 20 yards that he drove, he slowed down even more. He said, because that's when he can hear something running on his side, which would be the left. He could hear something running coming through the tree line. And he said, it's coming. He said, this thing is running. He said, and when he heard that, he started to pick up a little speed. Now, mind you, he said he still wasn't going fast, but he picked up a little speed. But he still can hear this thing coming through the woods. And he said, it's coming fast. He said, as them sounds started to get close, he stopped. He just stopped his truck. He said because of the way this thing was running, it was like it was going to parallel. So he thinking if he stopped, this thing just going to run out and just keep going. He said he looks out his window and he catch something, breaks the tree line. And this really what got me. He said this thing was running so fast, it's coming out. He know it's getting ready to break the tree line. He said this thing ran so fast out that tree line, right at his window. He said this thing stopped on a dime. It didn't even nick his truck, and it stopped. He said when it stopped, he jumped to the side, like over there where his friend was, in the passenger seat. And all he could see is this dark, massive figure. Now, mind you, he only looking at up in the chest area and the stomach, up where this six-pack was at. He only see that. Everything else is above his truck. He said that's how tall this thing was. He said this thing stopped on a dime. He said he could hear this thing breathing heavy and hard. He said this thing was breathing hard. And he could see this thing, chest and everything just going in and out, like it's just getting bigger and bigger. And he's still leaning back over to where his friend at. His friend like, what is they say, man, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. So he stays leaning over to where his friend at. And he's looking because all they see is a dark mass. And it took up the whole window. He said that's when this thing walked towards the front of their truck. He said this thing walked to the front and it stood right where the front headlight was at, on the driver's side. He said, now this thing come into view. Now he could see this thing. This thing looks into the window with those bright yellow eyes, and it's staring right at them. He said that's when this thing, what he said, put a hand on the front of his truck. Put a hand on the front of his truck, and it hit down on it. Boom! But it's still watching them. Said that's when this thing walked around to the front of the bed of that truck, and then it turned and walked in front of them like it's walking away, and it stopped. Now he can see the legs on this thing. Canine. He said this thing had massive shoulders. He said when that thing stopped, when it got about 5 feet from the front of their truck, it turned and looked again. And then it continued to go on the opposite side. He said they didn't move, but they watched this thing walk up in the tree line. He said because they never seen nothing like this in their life. The pointed ears, massive shoulders, chest that this thing was just cut up. And after this thing cleared the tree line and went up into the woods, they sitting there. And he asked his friend in the back, he was like, man, did you see that? And he said what hurt him so bad is that his friend said, no, I ain't see nothing. He said that hurt his feelings so bad because both of them saw this thing when it broke the tree line. And his friend in the back seat said he didn't see nothing. And he asked me, said, what you being smart? Yo, you didn't see that thing? He was like, no, man, I ain't see nothing. Just take me home. And he said, just because he did all that and didn't believe him, said that's what broke their friendship up. Because that thing stood at the truck. How can you miss it? When it took up the whole window, he said after he sat there and finished going back and forth all that, he dropped them home. He said he never dealt with him no more. He said because he don't like a person to call him a liar, and you sitting right there and you ain't see the same thing that I seen or he seen. He said that hurt his feelings. Said so he didn't deal with him no more. He said, but he ain't been down that road since. And that was his encounter. And that was his first encounter, which he would have another one. But it would be in a different area. He said he riding one night. He said, and this time he by himself. He said they got so many back roads in Mississippi. He said, so he riding down this back road. Said he on his way home. He said, but as he riding, he noticed that his lights hit a deer on the right. He said, so he stopped. He said that when he stopped, he watched this deer. He said, now, mind you, this deer wasn't too far from a bush that it was near. He said, so the deer ain't really paying him no attention at the time. It didn't even look at the lights. It's like its focus on that bush because it must sense something or know something. He said that's when this deer ears went up and it bolted on the other side, in the opposite direction. And he said he looking because he want to know why that deer run? Why he move like that? Where is he going at? He said, so he's focused on this bush now. He said that's when he see this snout ease out the bush. The snout comes out. And when the snout come out, that's when the head come out. And they could see that this thing had ears. He said this thing come out. Now, mind you, he said when this thing come out, it's jet black. It's on all fours. He said this thing turns and looks in his direction and turns back. And it walks about 5 feet. And he said this is what messed his head up. He said this thing spreaded all his limbs out, meaning the arms and his legs. Now, mind you, he said this thing had hominid legs. They were not canine. He said this thing spreaded all of his limbs out like a spider. He said, this is what he said. His words was like a spider would do. He said, but his underbelly, none of that, it never touched the ground. He said, then this thing, it just took off in the direction of where that deer was. Now, mind you, he said the deer was still there. He said, but when that thing started to move in that direction, deer just took off running. He said, but this thing cleared one side to the other one in like 0.01 second. He said this thing moved it fast and it had all of his limbs spread it out. Now I asked him, I'm like, well, what do you think it was? He said, and I don't know what it was. He said it had a short snout, couldn't have been no more than 3 inches. Now, mind you, he said this thing couldn't have been no taller than 2.5 to 3 feet tall. He said that's how tall this thing had to be. He said this thing was little, probably something like a juvenile. He said, but it had feet like we do, It had feet like we do, not no canine feet. He said, but it had feet like we do. He said, but the under part, like the bottom of your feet, he said they was just thicker. And he said that thing just ran so fast, and that was that encounter. Now, this next one comes from my same eyewitness, and this happened in Mississippi too. He said he had a friend who had a lot of property and asked him to come over and do some work. So he took his homeboy with him. So he said on his property he had a couple of barns, and he had like other little sheds and stuff like that. And he wanted them to clean them out and do what he could do, and he would, pay him. So he said they started working out, and he said they get to the end of his property. And when they get to the end of his property, because it had a gate up there, he said his friend taps him and say, look. He said, what? He said, look over there. They look. And they said about 30 to 40 yards, they see another house. Now, mind you, all this is in the woods, but they see another house. So they look over there, they notice that the house is not, occupied. It's like somebody had worked on it or whatever and just stopped. So he said, come on, let's go over there and check it out. So that's what they do, curiosity, and they killed the cat. So they goes over there. It gets over there and they look. They notice that this house, he said that it was sitting like on center block. So it's an opening like up under the porch. And They walking over that way and they look, it was like, what's that in that box right there, you think? He said, I don't know. He said, but they go and they see a box and they said they see like a whole lot of antique stuff. So he was like, well, nobody live here, so let's just keep it. We might get some money off of it. So that's what they did. Put the box out, set it on the ground. So he said, well, let's go inside and, just look around and see. So they go inside and they can see once they go inside, they see that's just a lot of walls. I mean, a lot of wires that's really ain't been hooked up and that's hanging out the wall. So he was like, man, we're going to just take these wires out, because we can make some money off of it. So they got a ham and stuff. They was pulling this out, pulling nails out. He said, so as he was pulling nails out, he would pull a nail out, make that sound. He said he would pull a nail out. That's when he started to hear something under the house, like something shifting, you know what I mean? Like in the dirt or something. And he was like, tell his friend, he was like, listen, you hear that? I said, hear what? That sound. He said, man, it's probably a raccoon or something like that, man. Don't worry. So he said they kept doing it. They would be like banging on something, boom, boom. And they said they started to hear like, sniffing sound. And it was real loud. They say, hold up, be quiet. You hear that? You hear that? Listen. And it would stop. It would make noise every time they would bang or pull something out. Whatever was under that porch at this time, because they didn't know, would make noise. So they were still pulling wires out. They would hear the sound again. And he said, look, man, let's just go. He tell his friend, man, let's just go. He said, man, hold up, man. We ain't going nowhere. We're going to get this wire. He said, man, I think we should go. He ain't paying no attention. So they continue, just to still get wire. So they still pulling the wire out the wall. This time they hear what sound like something scratching and digging in the dirt. Like, now they can hear this loud. He tell his friend, listen, this time, this thing don't stop. It continue to dig. Like something taking the claws or something. They don't know what it is, just digging in the dirt. They could hear this sound clear as day. Now he gets the idea, let's go out there and look up under the porch. His friend tell you, man, do you hear that digging sound and that sound? And I'm not looking up under no porch. So they going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Now at this time, he say they standing near the window. Like if you was to look out the window, that's where the opening at under the porch. He say they standing out the window. They hear what sound like a snort. He said that's the only thing he could describe it as, like a snort. And they was like, man, what is that? They looks out the window. This thing starts to scratch again. It's scratching the earth. It's scratching the dirt. They continue looking out the window. That's when they see what comes up under the house. What gets them first is their ears sticking up. Because that's all they see at first, is these ears sticking up. And they see the color, like, man, that's just probably a fox. His friend was like, man, I don't know. I don't think that's no fox. He said, man, look at the ears. That's a fox, I'm telling you. So this thing continued to come from under the house. They watching. Ears coming to view. Now it's coming from under there. They see the size of this thing head, which they say was massive. That's when he hit his partner. Man, that ain't no fox. They said the head on this thing was just humongous. And it's still coming from under there. Now, mind you, they say this thing is on all fours. And it's coming from under the house. They see from the shoulders down to part of the back. They say that's when this thing did something to defy everything that they believed in. They said this thing started to stand on its back legs. And they watching this thing just get bigger and bigger. They said this thing was the color of a fox, but the color just looked brighter. They said it's like this thing had groomed itself because it didn't have nappy hair or patches or none of that. They said this thing stood up. And they said it started to turn around slow. And they could see that this thing had a long snout. And they say when it turned around, you could see the teeth. You could see the canines hanging out like they was too big to go in this thing's mouth. This thing turns and it faces them. That's when it started to growl. He said they don't move, they don't do nothing. They just stare at this, what he said, abomination. He said because this thing looked like a werewolf to them. This thing just staring at them in the window. He said that's when this thing put his hands up on the porch, flat. He said, and that's when it like, you know how somebody would like arch their hand up and put their nails up on something? He said this thing did that, like it knew what it was doing. He said, and it pulled his claws back, scratching the porch. He said, like this thing was mad, upset. They said this thing had that type of attitude. Like it was mad because it was up under that porch, not bothering nobody. He said that's the feeling that he got from it. He said that's when his friends said, look, we need to go out the back door, a back window, a side window. His friend was so scared. He said, man, we need to leave. He said, look, that thing is still right there. I'm not going out there while it's there. He said that's when they could hear a voice in the distance calling them. And he said he know that's his friend calling him. He said that's when this creature turned, looked to where the voice was coming from, then turned and ran in the opposite direction. Now, mind you, it ran to the right of them. And then it broke off to the left. It's another gate that's got this property gated in. They said they watched this thing get to that gate and just leap on the other side. When they see this thing leap on the other side, they leaves out the house. They said they noticed that beyond that gate sat another house that was unoccupied. And he told his friend, he said, that thing must be living up under this house. And it's another house over there. So if this is little area, it ain't got to worry about me coming back no more. He say, because these things are not dumb. Now, another thing, he did say this thing had a tail. He said it had a tail, you know, just like a fox. He said, but it wasn't a fox. So I'm telling him, man, that was a Dogman. It's just the color. It's got to be rare because you don't see none brighter than what a fox color is. He said, I'm just giving it to you the way I saw it. And I told him, I said, man, I appreciate it. You know, I appreciate every encounter that you gave me, every encounter that you tell me, you know, and I still talk to him this day. And he still got more to give me, you know, but I just like sharing the ones that I already got. Now, I got one more. It's like a bonus. I got one more, and I'm going to tell that. And this come from an eyewitness. And I've been at this counter. I never just told it, you know, because like I told you, I would collect them and I would hold on to them. And I would just tell them when I feel as though I need to put them out there. Now, this comes from an eyewitness that lives in North Carolina. And she's an elderly lady. I don't want to say like old, you know, but she was an elderly lady. She was retired from her job. She lived alone. Kids had moved out, started their own life. So she had a nice little small house out in the country. And in the summertime, she said she used to like to plant gardens and stuff like that. This is something that she liked to do. So she did that one summer. She planted a garden, go out there every day, and she would water it. But sooner or later, it started to grow. And when it started to grow, because she would grow stuff like cabbage, potatoes, she just grew little different stuff. So as it started to grow, you know, she was happy about what she put in, and now she gonna have, you know, fresh vegetables and stuff like that. So she say one day she goes out, and you know, she still goes out. She want to pick the ones that's ripe already. So she goes out there and she picks some. She put them in a little basket. She takes them in the house and she sets them on the table because she want to wash them and clean them up because she want to use this for a meal. She says she goes back out and she sits on her back porch because this is something that she like to do. She retired, kids gone, so now she relaxed. She says she goes outside and she sits on her back porch. Now, mind you, her property has a fence around it, but she's all the way out in the country. But she put a fence around her little property. About a 6-foot fence, she said, I think. She said it was like about 6 feet. She put a fence around her property. So couldn't nobody really get in. You know, that's what she thinking, couldn't get in or nothing like that. So she's sitting out there on this particular day. She said that's when she could hear a howl in the distance. But she don't know what it is. So she gets up and she goes in the house. She said because the way that howl sounded, it scared her. So she goes in the house, locks her door and everything. She sits in the kitchen, cleaning her vegetables and stuff, what she had picked, so she can put them in her food and stuff like that. So that's what she did. She said later that night, after watching TV, she goes in her room. And she said she laying down. Now, mind you, her room sets on the side of the house. And she have a window that's facing right there. And if you look out the window, all you see is basically just green beyond. So she laying in her bed. And when she laying in her bed, she says something catches her eye at the window. And she looks and she says she just see a dark shadow just run past. But she don't know what it is. So she says she stayed up for about another hour. She finally went to sleep. The next day, she get up. She say when she get up and she goes out to do what she always loved to do, check on her garden. She goes out there and it's a mess. It's an array. I mean, plants and stuff is everywhere. She said it's like something just ripped stuff up and it just went through her garden and just tore it up. And she said she just stood there because she was hurt because she put all that work in to grow it and then something destroyed it. But she don't know what did it because you can still see vegetables and stuff laying over. She thinking that if a person would have did it, they would at least took it. But it's just laying there, destroyed. So she says she cleans it up because she didn't really want to call nobody. So she says she cleans it up, and just throw all that stuff away because it was destroyed. It's like something just poked holes in, but she said it was just sad of what happened. So she said after she cleaned it up, she goes and she sits on the porch. And when she sits on the porch, she's looking down at the end of her gate. She said when she looked down at the end of her gate, she see what she said to me. And it's crazy. She said she could see ears start to come up over top of her fence. But she only see the ears. Now, mind you, she said her gate got like cracks in each of the woods that's connected. But it's like it got cracks, like you could look through. She said she could see ears, but it went no further than these ears. And she thinking that something's watching her from the crack of her gate. So she just watched them. She said that's when she see the ears twitch. She said that's when she see these ears twitch. They move. And so she stands up. And when she stands up, she said these ears go from that spot all the way down to the end of her gate. And they stop. She said just the ears. She said that's what messed her head up. She said because that's all she could see at this time was ears. She said then they stop at the end of this gate. So she's still looking over there, but she's standing up because she's scared. She don't know what it is. So she turned to go in the house. She said when she turned to go in the house, that's when she hear a bang on her gate. And she said she turned around. And when she turned around, she looked over at them ears. She said that's when the head popped up and went back down real fast. She said she seen a dark head pop over that gate and go back down. But she said she don't know what it is. She said she know it ain't a human. And she know it ain't a bear because bear's not down there. So she goes in the house and she locks her doors. She puzzled now. She's scared. She's thinking about what was that? Because she don't know. She says she sit in the living room and she watched TV. She said at about 11:30, she goes in her room to try to get some sleep. She said when she laying in the bed, she said she felt herself dozing off. She said that's when she hear this tapping sound on her window. That. She sets up and she looks. She say, but she don't see nothing. She says she sat up for about 5 minutes. No more sounds or nothing. No more taps or nothing. And then she lay back down. When she lay back down, it did it again. That, 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 that. She sat back up. She said, whatever was on the side of that window, it was like it was trying to get her attention. This is what she said. She said it's like whatever that thing is tapping on her window is trying to get her attention. She says she stays up all night. She don't even go to sleep. The next day she goes in there and she drinks coffee and stuff to keep her up because she don't want to go to sleep because she's scared now. She says she don't want to get the police involved. This is what she said. So she peeps out the back door and she looks at her garden what's left. The rest of it is destroyed. It's gone. It's tore up. So she waits for a while and she goes out there and she cleans it up. She goes back and she sits on the porch again because she want to know what's doing this to her. She said after sitting out there for about 2 hours, those ears did the same thing that it did the day before. It's like they would just come over the top of her gate and start twitching. And she watching these ears, just sitting there twitching, like it's just picking at her or something. She don't know. So she stands up again. She said, but this time, them ears showed her what it's attached to. She said that's when them ears start to go up higher. And she see this huge black head, which she said looked like a wolf. She said the head was just wide on it. And she said this thing was way over top of her gate. And it's just looking at her. Now, mind you, she's standing up. She's scared. She said, could this thing look like a black werewolf? She said, that's how dark this creature was. She said, that's when this creature walked down the other end of her gate and it stopped. Then it walked to the other end, not taking his eyes off of her. He's still watching her. She said this thing was just pacing back and forth, watching her. Then it stopped near her gate door. It stops right there. And when it stops right there, it pushes on it. It pushes on the door of her gate. Just boom, 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 just pushing it back and forth. She said that's when she turns and she goes in the house. And when she goes in the house, she pulls the curtain and she looks out the window. It's still standing by the door of the gate. She said that's when this head went back down and all she seen was this thing just jump up and it's over and it's in her yard now. Now she could see this creature head on. She said she could hear this creature when it hit the ground. That's how much force it had. Boom. She watching this thing. And it's walking around her yard. It stops. And it focuses right on the corner of that window where she had that curtain pulled back. Like this thing knew she was looking at it. She said this thing had long arms with hands, shoulders, but it had canine legs. She thinking that this thing is a werewolf. That's what she think it is. And it's focused on her. It know the exact spot that she's in. But she don't know how. But she says she know that this thing is intelligent. She said that's when this thing sniffed the air. It's just sniffing real hard. She said this thing just starts sniffing and then it stopped. Then it started to walk towards her back. She said this thing steps up on the porch. She shuts the curtain, but she's staying there. She said she could just see this dark shadow fill up that spot right there. That's how massive this creature was. She said this creature did what it did the night before. That. This thing taps on her window again. She says she don't move. She just stand there. And she said in her mind, please leave me alone. She said that's what she said. And she didn't know what else to do. She said in her mind, please leave me alone. And she said she closed her eyes. And she said when she opened them, she looked. And when she looked out that window again, that thing was gone. She said, because there's no way that these things should exist or should be walking around. She said, but this thing looked like a werewolf to her. That's how she described it. And I asked her, I said, did this thing have a tail? She said, no, I didn't see a tail. She said, I know that these things are smart, intelligent. She said, it's like this thing tapped on my window to get my attention. And I told her, you ain't the only one that it did it to, trust me. She said, but she haven't had no more trouble out of that thing since the first incident. And I told her, that's a good thing. And hopefully you won't. Because I tell people, man, when it comes to these cryptids, they unpredictable. You don't know what they're going to do next. When you think you got them figured out, bang, they hit you with something else. We never going to get all the information that we need on this Dogman creature. We not. That's why I would never say or use the word, I'm an expert. You will never hear me say those words because I don't know no one that has worked up close and personal with these cryptids in their environment. No one. So until we get the proper data and do the right research to say what these things are, then let's just leave it in the air. Just say we still seeking to find out what they are. That's why every eyewitness that I get, everybody got a different story when you hear them, but we all have something in common. We all came in contact with this unknown cryptid that we call Dogman. That's why I tell people, I want to see one. No, you don't. You don't really want to see one. You really don't. Just stick to what the people say they look like and what they did to them, because these things can traumatize people. I mean, they have made people commit suicide. You know, like I said, when you think you got them figured out, bam, it's something new. That's why I always keep in contact with all my eyewitnesses. They got my number. They got my email. They know how to reach me. And if they call me or text me and say, I need to talk, hey, we can do that. You know, like now I got eyewitnesses lined up, you know, that they want to tell their encounter. A lot of them be so scared and so afraid to come on because they don't want to get ridiculed or talked about, which I understand that part. That's why I'm so strict on anonymity. And that's something I believe in. Because if a person asks me not to use their name, their location, I'm not doing it. Because they taking their time out to give me their encounter. So they expect for me to keep certain things a secret. And I'm going to do that. Like I said, I love what I do. And I'm going to continue to keep doing it because I love helping people. And that's it, Vic.
Thanks for doing what you do, Marvin. You know we appreciate it. And if an eyewitness wants to contact you and share an experience they had with the Dogman with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They could email me at Hezekiah Allen 8318 at gmail.com. That's Hezekiah Allen 8318 at gmail.com.
And so that everyone listening knows who wants to contact Marvin, I'm going to put that email address in the description for tonight's show. That'll make it really easy that way. But having said that, Marvin, as always, thanks so much for coming back on and sharing these new experiences that people have shared with you with us.
Hey, Vic, it's always a pleasure to come on your show. And because this is something I love to do. You know, that's why I say anytime you need me back, you got my number, you got my email, you hit me, you know I'm going to show up.
It's definitely appreciated. Well, Marvin, like I told you, I can't thank you enough. Thanks again so much for coming on, and have a great night. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.